Hi, I'm Brian Malow, and we are live from the 73rd Lindau Nobel Laureate Meeting, and I am speaking with one of the 630 young scientists attending this year. It's a physics meeting, and our young delegates come from 90 countries, and they're here to mix it up with about 35 Nobel laureates. And I asked Max Kotz to speak to me because he's a physicist, and I haven't talked to anybody about climate change, but that's your general field, right? So you're British and working in Germany?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Where are you?
So I work at the Potsdam Institute, which is an interdisciplinary institute working on the topic of climate change. So there's a big mix of different disciplines, a lot from the physics background like me, and then a lot of economists, a lot of engineers. And I work somewhere sitting between the two. So I have this background in physics, and I've worked a lot on the physical science of climate change, how our weather systems are changing, but I've also ended up working a lot on what the impacts of those kind of changes are on our society and our economies. So say the impacts of weather extremes like heavy precipitation, droughts, floods, these kind of things.
Yeah, so can you, I know that was a variety of topics.
Yeah.
Tell me what kind of, a little more specifically, something that you've been focused on lately?
Yeah, so I mean, in the last couple years, one of the big focuses has been about what are the impacts of these kind of weather extremes on the aggregate economy, so aggregate economic growth, and really are there impacts that we can see there? And from a lot of the research that we've done, we can really see that there are clear negative impacts of these kind of events like heavy precipitation extremes, extreme temperatures on the overall productivity of our economies that really slows down economic growth at this aggregate level, which is a really sort of important thing to be able to show from a sort of policy perspective of trying to evaluate how we should respond to climate change.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess we really have this problem with short-term thinking where we think we're saving money, we don't want to invest. I'm asking really that if we're like industries that are so invested in the fossil fuel technologies that they don't want to make the investment to shift to something new, but the financial consequences later will be even worse.
Well, exactly. I think that's one of the sort of standard narratives about climate change that our work is trying to sort of overturn, or at least it sort of does shed a different light on. Typically people think that to deal with climate change, that's going to involve a lot of costs now to invest in these new technologies, install renewables, so on and so forth. But our work really clearly shows that the costs of inaction are actually substantially larger than those costs of doing an energy transition.
Yeah. Well, you know, this Lindau meeting historically, for 73 years, historically has been focused on the Nobel Prizes in the sciences, physics, like this year's meeting, chemistry and medicine physiology, but every 3 years there's an economics meeting, and it sounds like you could have attended the economics meeting as well. Maybe, but you're a physicist, so tell me something. I want to hear something about, instead of the economic consequences, something about something interesting that you've worked on involving some of the physics of some part of climate change.
Yeah, well, one of the important examples of one of the consequences of general global warming and climate change in terms of the physical parameters, physical side of things, and quite an easy example to explain is heavy precipitation extremes. So as the atmosphere warms, essentially a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture vapor. That's a really sort of simple consequence of the Clausius-Clapeyron relation, which is sort of basic thermodynamic physics from early part of the, maybe even end of the 1900s, let alone, 1800s, let alone early part of the 20th century. And as a consequence of that, that really means that the intensity and frequency of the heaviest precipitation extremes, which are, their magnitude is typically constrained by the amount of water vapor in the water column, because when it rains as heavily as it does, it just dumps everything. So if the water column can hold more water vapor just in a warmer atmosphere, then that means that the heavy precipitation extremes are going to get more intense. And that's really what we're seeing. Actually, that's what we saw in Lindau like a couple of weeks ago. I mean, if we look behind us, the lake is filled with loads of floating logs and stuff, and that's really from...
And the water level is high.
And the water level is super high, yeah, and it's because of really heavy flooding that was across southern Germany sort of a couple of weeks ago, which caused quite a widespread disruption to infrastructure and stuff. All my friends who were on trains completely cancelled across the country. And so, yeah, we can see quite clearly how the physics connects global warming to those kind of events. And our work has now also shown how those kind of events also have then these economic consequences.
This reminds me of this topic that you hear climate change deniers will bring up often. It's like, if there's one I forget his name, that senator or congressman who brought a snowball into Congress. But if there's one cold day, they're like, what are you talking about? The idea that climate change, I guess that led to the preferring the language of climate change rather than global warming, because it doesn't just mean every day is going to get hotter and hotter, right?
Yeah,
It's like maybe you can say something about why the result is extremes of both ends, rain or drought, hot or heavier snow.
No, good question. I mean, so people like the term maybe global climate change rather than global warming because there's a whole host of phenomena, like say these heavy precipitation extremes. It's not super clear that, like, say, extremes at the lower end of the spectrum, at least in terms of, say, temperatures are getting more frequent. It's pretty clear that as the distribution shifts to high temperatures, we're going to get more of these hot extremes. There's some evidence that, say, across the northern US and Europe, essentially across the high latitudes, that we might be getting more of these kind of cold snaps. That if you remember a few years ago in Texas, there was this sudden period where very abnormally there were like 2-3 weeks of really freezing temperatures, which damaged like loads of infrastructure, and that's connected to certain atmospheric dynamic patterns where you get what's called a wave train build up and in the atmosphere, which means you have pressures of high pressure and low pressure systems stuck in place, and they get locked in their positions, and that can allow really cold weather to come down, say from the Arctic, and cause these cold snaps. So there's some evidence that climate change might be making those kind of things more likely, but it's not super conclusive. But in the broader statistics of climate, when we look at the aggregate statistics, it's really clear that these hot extremes, these heavy precipitation extremes, and droughts as well are becoming more frequent. Yeah.
There have been several talks, possibly by Stephen Chu definitely addressed energy and the climate future, and with not a very optimistic assessment. And we just saw a series of short talks by some of the young scientists here, and a couple of them were climate related.
Yeah.
Amongst any of these, was there anything that caught your ear that was interesting?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always interesting to get the perspective of people who are mainly working on physics, and so really on the detailed technicalities of, say, either theoretical physical foundations or the technologies that we can apply on the basis of them. So people who aren't normally working in say, the climate domain, it's really cool that those people are talking about these issues and are, well, particularly if they're working on new technologies, that's often connected to the energy transition. So personally, I don't work on the energy transition side of things, more on the physical climate science. So I've learned a lot in that regard, which has been interesting. And it's just great that there's like a big discourse going on around that, and people have their different views about what's the best way to do an energy transition. We've heard a lot about nuclear fission, for example, compared to renewables. There's been some debate there, which is good. I think it's healthy to have that debate, but good that there's like a clear demand for talking about that topic and people being really interested in it.
Yeah, is there are you able to be optimistic? Like, where are you on the spectrum of optimism and pessimism about our future?
I don't know. It's a really hard question to answer. It's such a personal one. Even if someone were to tell you, like, oh, you're going to die in a year, like, I don't know how I would necessarily respond to that question. So, I mean, from a technical perspective, like, obviously human emissions are driving climate change. So we're the source of this issue that's becoming more and more substantial, and yet we're super dependent on our energy, like, obviously. So it is a massively difficult trade-off for us to navigate as a species, as a civilization, which makes it intrinsically really hard. And the consequences do look like they could be really, really, really bad. But at the same time, like, at every sort of further increment of global warming that gets worse, we can also then do more action to sort of stop it getting even worse. So I like to think of it with that perspective, that there's always stuff that we can do. I don't think it's good for us to get into sort of a doomsday narrative where we just like, oh, everything's ruined and we can't do anything, and therefore people just get apathetic and then don't want to do anything. There's a lot of positive narrative here about the role of young scientists working in physics to develop these new technologies that we can use to try and mitigate our emissions, and also adapt to climate change as well.
And towards that, let's move towards a more optimistic topic and the meeting. And you provided a little segue there, because like these Nobel laureates, some of them have been coming to this meeting two of the laureates this year have attended 27 meetings over the past 35 years since they won their Nobel Prizes. And the reason I'm tying this to optimism is because this meeting is about mentorship, and the laureates come because they want to to be there as mentors or answer any questions that they can for the young scientists. I'm going to one of the interesting things about Lindau is that you occasionally see a Zeppelin flying overhead, because the factory where the Zeppelins are actually made is just about an hour and a half up the coast of Lake Constance. So it's not always in the middle of an interview that we see a Zeppelin flying overhead. And
thermodynamics in motion.
I'm enamored of them. Yeah. So how cool is that? So we are here at this meeting, and it is about mentorship. If I didn't quite complete that thought because of my ADHD potential, is that there is, built into that is an optimism of the older generation of scientists cares about the new generation of scientists and giving them as much help as they possibly can. And this meeting is not just about science presentations by a long shot. In fact, maybe you can say something about that. Maybe that even surprised you. Did you realize it wasn't just going to be lectures on science topics? What else has it been? What would you tell someone about this meeting if they're not familiar with it?
Yeah, well, you're definitely right. There's more to it than just scientific presentations, which also personally I'm very pleased about, because I no longer work so much in the theoretical physics world, and there's not so much on climate here. But it's been really valuable to have these kind of personal exchanges, and particularly I've really enjoyed the sort of closed room discussions. I forget what's the actual name.
They're the open exchanges.
Open exchanges, yes.
Because the other amazing thing is, each laureate tends to give a 30-minute lecture during the week. They are recorded and they are online. Within almost immediately, they're online. A lot of the types of sessions are recorded and put online. But the open exchanges, only the Nobel laureates and the young scientists are allowed in the room. No journalists, no other staff. And it's to provide this chance to have a conversation where no one else is there.
Exactly, a super casual format, and you get, the questions that have been asked have ranged from like totally personal things about like what are your hobbies, like to very technical things or career related things that are quite inspiring or helpful for people. So that's been really, really good. Had some great discussions with Anton Salinger about wacky discussions about interpretations of quantum mechanics, and I've heard a lot of other good comments from, is it Eric who spoke yesterday?
Betzig.
Eric Betzig, yeah, exactly, who has a very interesting career background and was very encouraging of people really to pursue their interests regardless of whether they're succeeding in, say, a conventional sense of high publications or grants, because he had a career that was at times unemployed. I don't know. Where he said he wrote his 2 Nobel papers in both in periods in which he was unemployed and just doing science off his own back, out of his own interest, which I think is a great thing to share. And he said that comfortably in front of other people, so I hope it's okay to go out online. But,
I think that is
I think that's fine, yeah. It was very inspiring.
I think it's more about the laureates can speak. It's more about giving the privacy to the young scientists who might be shy about the questions they're asking. Like maybe you don't want, I'm just kind of guessing, but maybe you don't want your institute to know you said this. And it doesn't leave that room. No, definitely questions about funding and things like that, about the scientific process, which are sort of very, very important for people, but might be more, controversial, or, that's been a good chance for people to discuss those. Anything else that you've enjoyed about the meeting? Any highlights or just observations?
It's a very beautiful place, and it's great to be with a lot of young, enthusiastic people from lots of different countries. That's kind of fun, to be honest, just sitting at dinner with a range of people and seeing all these different ways of interacting, different names, everything. It's very rich environment, really enjoyable.
I think I mentioned, and this is pretty typical, this year the young scientists come from 90 or 91 different countries. And I always love that you're British but you're working in Germany. It's like, oh, you're from Pakistan but you're working in India, or you're working in the United States. And exactly. I love all that.
Great variety.
The international aspect. So thanks for taking the time. I wonder if you have, and maybe I might ask you if there was something you wish more people understood about science, but I wonder in your field, in climate change, is there something that you would want, like a parting thought about how we should think about?
How to think about climate change, a really simple one that I think people often underestimate is, or maybe I can ask you, so how much do you think we need to reduce our emissions to stop climate change continuing to unfold? Like what % or something?
Oh, well, having heard Stephen Chu's presentation during the opening ceremony on Sunday, I think We have to reduce it 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Good. No, that's great. But a lot of people.
But I had informed it. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what would someone think? Maybe?
Well, I think sometimes people don't get that idea, and that idea of net zero, that like the climate system continues to evolve as long as we're emitting, because those emissions are sort of, they're putting the atmosphere out of equilibrium. It's a bit of a game changer in terms of the thinking, because it means, it's not that we have to like slow down our emissions or something, but we really have to just transform the system,
but
the whole system.
Is that even possible? I mean,
let's
he really
see,
said,
let's see,
because is this right? So even if we went to zero emissions today, there's going to, say there's a lag where the temperature is going to continue to rise for a while.
For a while, it's not that long. There's inertia mainly because of the ocean heat content. It's the same reason that the ocean's warmer at the end of the summer rather than at the start, just because it's got a higher heat capacity than the land.
Okay.
So the ocean warming takes a while to sort of go through the system, and so we'll keep having atmospheric warming for a while after we'd stop emissions, but it's not that long. It's like order of magnitude 15 years. Don't quote me on that.
Right.
But so still there would be some inertia, but it doesn't really change the picture. Still, even if it takes a while, it still means if we want to stop further impacts, further changes in the natural system, we need to just get to zero.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So, hey, that's easy enough.
It's a challenge,
Yeah, we've got a good challenge.
Yeah.
Scientists love challenges.
Yeah.
Other people don't like challenges that much.
No, let's do it.
But thank you very much. Really
Pleasure.
appreciate you taking the time to talk. And we'll be hearing from some more young scientists throughout the day.